from the College by the Lake, Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Local, regional, national, and international guests discussing the issues and topics affecting the way you live are on Forum, the North Idaho College Public Forum, with your host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart.
Today's program is a discussion and actually a review of a program that took place in North Idaho in May 1998. This program was done under the auspices of the Spokesman Review and the North Idaho College Popcorn Forum. We called that program in May Facing Racism in America, Conversations with North Idaho High School Students. We have as our guest today the person who had the idea of putting on that very successful program, and I welcome to the North Idaho College Public Forum Ken Sands, who is interactive editor of the Spokesman Review here in the offices in North Idaho and Coeur d'Alene. Ken, we congratulate you. I know you contacted me and we talked about the idea of putting this program together, and we're today going to discuss that took place in May, and students came from all over North Idaho on this very important issue, facing racism in America. Also today on the program, in addition to discussing why you had this idea, how it was put together, and what were the results of the program, I want to take some time to also recognize your work and many others, both here and in Spokane, at the Spokesman Review with a 2-month series that also addressed racism. And your newspaper is to be highly commended for its very civic responsibilities, and I know that's been a very important impact throughout the Inland Northwest. Anyway, I want to start by welcoming you to the program today.
Well, thank you, Tony. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure to talk about this subject. I don't remember when it was. Maybe it's back in March of 1988 you called me and had this idea. Would you share with our viewers, not only here in our locality, but across the Northwest, what the idea was and what it encompassed?
Well, we were concerned with the upcoming Aryan March in July, falling into the same trap of reporting too much about the Aryans and not enough about what life really is like here in North Idaho with the vast majority of people who don't have those kinds of thoughts at all. And so we really struggled with a way of covering the issue that would be positive and helpful for the community. And so we had a whole series of meetings and brainstorming sessions, and one of the ideas that I came up with was to have this seminar for high school students. Now, the difficulty with scheduling it right at the end of May was that of the 14 or so high schools in North Idaho, many of them were having their finals or studying for finals, so unfortunately some of them couldn't come, but I got a very good response from basically every high school in North Idaho saying it was a wonderful idea. And of those that could come, there were 700 students who attended, which I thought was a very good turnout.
Well, that was an excellent turnout. We had it here at North Idaho College, and the program took place for about a half a day. It was held in our gymnasium. And would you take our viewers through the different components of that program, what was presented there, and then the breakout sessions, how the whole program worked?
Okay, well, first of all, we had 3 speakers lined up. We had George Critchlow from the Gonzaga University School of Law, who talked about First Amendment and the reasons why the Aryans were able to have the parade in the first place. We also had Norm Gissel, who was kind of a historian on human rights activities in this particular area. And we had Larry Nicholas from the Anti-Defamation League in Seattle, who specializes in having programs for high school age students on diversity issues. We also had Scott Sines, our managing editor, who came over with a slideshow, and I think that really helped open the eyes of the students, maybe who hadn't been aware of all the racist activities in our region. And we've been documenting that at the newspaper for the last 20 years, and just to have a short slideshow documenting that, I think really made them very aware of things that they might not have known about. After that, we then broke into 60 small group discussions, which took a tremendous amount of coordination and a tremendous amount of help from the community, because we had to have adult facilitators for every single group, and we were very fortunate to get people to volunteer to do that. And that was probably the best part of the day, because the students got to meet with students from other high schools. And to quote Jason Scarth of Lake City High School, he wrote, "I had a chance to talk about issues at the racism seminar that I otherwise would not discuss." to me, that's what this day was all about. And so for an hour and a half, students got to talk about those issues.
Another wise decision you made is that when they broke into the groups, they were not all from the same school. And as I traveled around to different groups, I heard students saying, well, I've never met students from other schools in this context. I've only met them in, say, an athletic event and so forth. I did visit probably 35 or 40 of the groups. What else? I think it was just such a wise move. It also permitted the students to actually be participants and to engage one another in conversation rather than just sitting and hearing about a program, although the program, I believe, initiated a lot of thinking on their part. Would you also share with our viewers what happened next? You, after absorbing all of these conversations and talking to some of the facilitators, you invited the students to do something which wound up published in the paper.
Right. We had, I think, 22 students who wrote essays talking about their views on racism, what they learned at the seminar, and what maybe we can do about the issue as a community. And we published several of those in their entirety, and then excerpts from all the rest of them. And that appeared in a Sunday edition of the Spokesman Review, both in the Idaho edition and in the Spokane edition, and took up 2 full pages of the newspaper. It also then appeared again in the special reprint that we did, a special section right before the Aryan Parade.
Yeah, we're going to talk in a minute about those kind of things that happen. From the conversations you had with people who attended this seminar and reading all the materials and all, would you share with the viewers any other conclusions that you have about the results of the day? What did you think that the students took away, first of all, from it, and then we'll come back to the facilitators?
Okay. Well, I think it was a very eye-opening experience for a lot of the students. I heard over and over again that this was such a great thing. They hadn't had a chance really to talk about this in school very much, and it wasn't a topic that really came up among their friends. A lot of students said, well, we really don't have a whole lot of racial diversity in North Idaho, so it generally isn't an issue. We don't concern ourselves with it too much, but then they also admitted, yes, if any racism is bad racism, we have a reputation and we have to do something about it. And they all seem to be very positive about the need to do something.
I know I had the opportunity to talk with a number of the facilitators. I knew them. A lot of them were human rights activists, and your staff at the newspaper and others in the community. What do you think that they gleaned from their work in working with the youth?
Well, I think sometimes people who get involved in a cause, whatever it is, and they spend many, many years doing it, they maybe don't have the same excitement that they did in the beginning. But I think the facilitators may have gotten even more from this program than the students did, because it really, I think, renewed their vigor in seeing that these 16 and 17 and 18-year-old students had such good hearts. I think it really said something about this community and about the future of the community, and I thought that was very hopeful, and that's what I heard from the facilitators, that they were very impressed with the students.
Another reaction I had, I get your reaction to it. It seemed to me that there was such high energy and such seriousness on the part of the students. Even during that large assembly, they were really quiet in listening to the speakers. Not only were they searching for definitions of the problem, but do you think that they left there with a renewed effort on many of them's part to try to work on the problem, or if they see certain incidents, they'd be supportive of those who face the discrimination?
I do, and you have to remember, many of these students were seniors, and this is the last week or two of school, and I think that's a significant commitment on their part just to show up in the first place, and to sit there for half a day and take all this stuff in. I thought was very hopeful that they were viewing this as something they were doing as citizens, citizens of this community, not as students going to a required assembly, but future citizens and voters in this area.
Another point, I know you just had a number of ideas in mind of why you want to do it, but it's been my experience that when you're dealing with a problem of a hate message in a community or an organized hate group, that the general population of all ages, and youth in particular, they need an outlet to respond. That's extremely important for the community and for individuals. Do you feel that also made this summit or symposium, whatever you wish to call it, more successful because it was reaching that point where youth knew what was coming and they wanted to be a part of the answer to the problem?
Well, I think so. A lot of these kids seemed very idealistic, and but they also didn't seem very empowered. They got the message, though, especially from Larry Nicholas of the Anti-Defamation League, that they can empower themselves. They have it within themselves to make a difference. And that was a tremendous message for them to get and to understand. And the power that 700 high school students have is tremendous. And I think they realized that.
So that was an empowering process, both individually and collectively.
Right.
He also Mr. Nichols brought some youth with him from Seattle, and they have a wonderful program that ADL has in Seattle. And the fact that they were here, what do you think, what kind of impact that had as a model for students here?
Well, those 4 students actually helped facilitate some of the small group discussions, and they got into such wonderful discussions that the North Idaho students actually had to be pulled away when it was time to go and catch the bus. They wanted to stay and spend all day talking to these people from different backgrounds, from different areas, who had so much different experiences than they had had. They were fascinated and didn't want to leave.
They won't ever forget that.
No, I'm sure not.
Yes. One other area on the effect of the students, what would be your reaction to say after that kind of experience that everyone doesn't leave with the same impact, of course, we're not suggesting that, but do you think some future leaders were born at the seminar, that they found a way that how they want to become leaders and activists?
Well, I certainly hope so. I imagine most of the students who came are maybe freshmen at college right now at the University of Idaho or elsewhere, and I think they probably have had a seed planted somewhere that when the opportunity arises, yes, they will stand up for what's right and become a leader.
I think more at North Idaho College, anywhere else, I've seen a number of them on campus this fall, and some of them come by to visit with me, and they're doing things here, but they also talk about the experience they had that day. And I really want to congratulate you for you put in tremendous hours. What do you see in the future, where there is or is not a threat from a particular group or a march? Should we continue this kind of effort?
Well, that's an interesting question. I had a meeting with some curriculum people at Gonzaga University when I came up with this idea to get some of their thoughts. And they said, a one-time seminar is great, it helps, but that's not the whole answer. The answer has to do with getting into the curriculum at every high school on a consistent basis so that, this isn't the one opportunity that these kids have to talk about these issues, that it becomes part of the curriculum. And we can continue, and I hope to continue doing these kinds of seminars on a larger scale involving different high schools as part of the answer. But I think it needs to be addressed at every school.
There's a thought here that's very similar to what we do, we being the North Idaho College Popcorn Forum and North Idaho College Human Equality Club and the Kootenai County Task Force on Human Relations and the school districts of Post Falls and Coeur d'Alene. For 13 years now, I believe it has been, that we have a Martin Luther King Day program that's actually conducted by the 5th graders, basically themselves. There's a brief period with a speaker that's an adult, but with the wonderful teachers in that system, with Pam Pratt, a principal at one of the schools, being one of the major coordinators. For 13 years we've been doing these programs of 5th graders. There's 1,200 of them that assemble together, and you watch the message from youth to youth. What I find about that so impressive is that it's ongoing, and that by using the same grade every year, students are not missed in that process. One of the things that we often do, if we're happy with a certain program, those students go away, but new students come on, and they don't have that experience unless one continues that. So I guess what I'm asking is, based on what's going on with the 5th graders, do you envision something similar at the high school level?
Well, I certainly hope so. In fact, I imagine many of those students that we had at the high school seminar went through the Martin Luther King program when they were in the 5th grade. And that's maybe one reason why they were so enthusiastic and looking forward to coming.
As a matter of fact, Ken, on that note, there's a number of students at North Idaho College that will come up to me and say, do you remember when I was in the 5th grade and I was at the Martin Luther King program, and now here they are, college students, 18 or 19, so it does have that impact. I have I guess, a connecting question that relates to that, and then I'm going to go into some other things that the spokesman has done and is doing as a newspaper. But when you look at those kind of issues, and we talk about there's so many terms. At your seminar, I heard a lot about stereotyping. A lot of students broadened it beyond racism in those sessions. They felt free to do that, and so it got a very broad discussion. And we talk about prejudice, and we talk about bigotry, and we talk about discrimination. And out of that, the issue of hate. And certainly at Gonzaga University, one of the most exciting things happening in the country with the Gonzaga University Institute for Action Against Hate, just commencing its work here in the fall, particularly the program in October. This won't air until after that, but they're studying what is hate and how you deal with it, and trying to develop a curriculum and workshops. With that long, involved background, what do you see as the greatest effort that we can make to eradicate prejudice and bigotry as a community here in North Idaho and in eastern Washington, inland Northwest? What would you say from your experience and what you and others have been doing in your field of journalism?
Well, I'm certainly no expert. In fact, I feel like I've just scratched the surface of the issue. But what I will say is that I think what we've done that's worked is begun a conversation. I don't think there are any easy answers. Otherwise, we would know them by now. But I think what's important is having the conversations. So many people in their daily lives don't ever have to confront racism in North Idaho. And I think most people here probably think that, it's not an issue for them, and why should they have to read about it in the newspaper? I think we're trying to reach those people by saying, look, we need to have this conversation. It may be difficult. It may not affect you directly every day, but in a broader sense, it does. It affects your children and your grandchildren and the place that this area will become in the future.
So I hear over and over that the root of this whole issue is education. I would put forth a theory for you to react to that a child is not born with the bigotry. It's a learned behavior. And if something is learned, can we safely assume that with the right process it can be unlearned?
Well, I would hope so. But again, I don't feel like that's a problem with the vast majority of people in North Idaho. I don't think they have to unlearn bad behavior.
I agree with that.
I think it's the education that needs to take place is just more of an awareness that there are issues out there and that good, concerned citizens who live here need to talk about it.
To support your thesis, we had in your paper, certainly with other papers and with the television station, gave tremendous coverage to the Lemons to Lemonade pledge. And to give support to your comment, there were 2,700 individuals and organizations that signed that pledge. And as we sat here taping this program on early October, first week of October, there's only been one day since July the 20th that there haven't been letters and checks in the mail Monday through Saturday for that. And so those messages are saying the same thing. But I was speaking of a segment of society. No area is completely free from prejudice and bigotry. And so for those that need to do the most in researching their hearts and so forth, there are those kind of things that the conversation that you're talking about can cause people to do analysis. I've had people say to me, yes, I do have prejudice, or I have found prejudice and I'm working on it. Let's talk about the newspaper's project. I know that you had a lot of meetings and starting a long time before the march, and I know I was invited to one of your sessions where you were in a very serious and very meaningful way were agonizing on how best to do it. You've mentioned it today. Share with us, after all that, how you came to the conclusion to do this. And I'm going to hold up for our viewers a copy of what you turned out to call In It Together. I believe it was over about 2 months. And then when all the articles were finished, all you were involved in, you put it in this publication, was available to the public. Share with us this project. And I also want to hold up that for cars and homes and all, you did this In It Together. I see a lot of those in cars yet. So these were 2 major productions. And just take us through that.
Well, again, the subhead is a conversation about race. And we are taking a slightly different approach to journalism here. something that might be called civic journalism or solutions journalism, where we try to reach out to the community and get voices from all throughout the community into the newspaper, rather than trying to tell people what we think they need to know about racism. We hear from them. You know, like I said before, we don't have the answers. What we have is the forum and the ability to have the conversation. So what we were able to do over the course of 2 months was to gather together different groups of people, clergy, business, schools, to talk about the issue and have their voices actually in the paper. So we, like you said, we spent a lot of time in meetings trying to figure out what segments of the community to tap into, and certainly we didn't get all segments of the community, but I think we got a wide enough range to hear a good cross-section of opinions in the community.
As one analyzes this series that you did, it's in different components, and I'd like to spend a little time going through those. Certainly one of the areas that you covered were articles and statements that were written by people like in the religious community or the government support. So, and then there were editorials every week, and then there were interviews. And why don't you just take us through the different components that you tried to put together to make this a whole publication?
Okay, well, the reprint itself was just a combination
Sure.
of all the individual stories and editorials, like you said, that appeared. And again, the idea was to try to get a sense of the entire community. So we had, for instance, our education reporter talking to people in schools. We had our religion reporter talking to members of the clergy. And, you know, there was a very nice profile of you and your long, long history in civil rights in North Idaho. And I think the combination of all that really, I hope, led the readers to believe that there is already the discussion going on in different parts, different corners of the community. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes, it does. I'll make a note here that I'm, like many people, I suppose, shy about when things are more personal about oneself, but I will only share this, and I shared it with Cynthia Taggart, who did that particular column, just to try to assist in helping how what you do can impact individuals. I had 2 telephone calls, personal calls from 2 gentlemen in Spokane following this publication, and the conversations were almost identical. In both cases, they indicated to me that, I don't know, they sounded like they probably were men in their 30s, something like that, and they indicated that they'd been on the sideline on these issues in their life, and they called to inform me that they were no longer going to be on the sideline, that they were going to become committed to working on these issues. And one of them even asked for contacts with organizations in Spokane, human rights organizations that he could work with. So I'm just saying that the conversation that you put together not only caused others around the dinner table to engage in conversation, but also to search themselves if they could help. And so I would say that would be one of the effects and benefits.
Well, I'm hoping that is kind of an empowering exercise for members of our community when they read what other people are saying. You know, maybe their coworkers or people they go to church with are being allowed to have their views publicized in the newspaper. That they realize, well, they have that power too. They can make a difference. They can stand up and have their views heard too.
I'd like to take you through, we don't have a lot of time left, but a series of things that get you to react to it because you've been deeply involved and you've had time to think about all this. And I hope that you won't mind giving just a little advice. That you always show a lot of humility, and but I hope I can call upon you to do this. What would you say to one of our viewers if our viewer was at a table and there's a conversation going on and a very offensive joke is told, say it's a racist joke? What advice would you have to this person who's sitting there and finds this obviously very troubling and offensive? How should they respond?
Well, I wish I had the answer to that. You know, I've been in that situation before, and I probably handled it different ways myself. I suppose what I would do is take the person aside later, privately, and tell them that I thought it was inappropriate and inoffensive, that I still like them as a person, but here's why I don't agree with what they said. I know other people have said, well, you need to stand up right there in front of everyone and say, no, that's not right. I'm not sure I could do that, but again, that's just my personality.
Your gentleness shows, and that's great. But I think out of that is that we each one have to find our own path of how we would, that there's more than one path in addressing it, if one does address it and doesn't ignore it. A second question that I would have, there are victims in society, there are victims of the prejudice and the bigotry. What is a statement that one could make, or what can one do as a supporter, or to give support to someone who has faced discrimination? How can one be a true friend when that is so needed?
Well, I think the best way is one-on-one. If you have a friend or a neighbor or an acquaintance, someone you know who has been a victim, just to show one-on-one support that you're there for them. And I think people in our community already do that. I doubt that there's a problem with friends and neighbors, but certainly joining a human rights task force isn't necessarily what a lot of people are going to do, but individually, one-on-one, they can make a tremendous difference, I think.
And I'm sure you're correct that many people do this, and they become, a great comfort to those who face that. And also in the organizations, both in Spokane and Coeur d'Alene, human rights groups, there are victim support committees that do it another way and assist in that. Do you think that in the short time we have left that your paper, I know you can't commit for the paper, but this is a very important topic, racism, but there are other important topics in human rights. Are there any ideas that you may extend to other issues other than racism?
Well, certainly. In fact, in my new role as interactive editor, that's one of the things that we'll be looking at. And I again go back to solutions journalism. If we have a problem, let's look for solutions. And when a problem so obviously presents itself, we address it.
Thank you. Ken Sanders, you've been very kind with your time, and you've done so much on this topic, and we thank you for all your work and your professional journalism, and thanks for being on our program. Ladies and gentlemen, I know you found this program to be very informative and helpful, and I would thank you for watching us today, and I really thank Ken Sands and the Spokesman Review for providing us this opportunity to discuss this important issue with you. I invite you to be with us again next week at the same time when we shall discuss yet another issue. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
The North Idaho College Public Forum was videotaped live from the studios of Instructional Technology on the campus of North Idaho College for viewing at this more appropriate time. We invite you to join us again next week for another all-new edition of the North Idaho College Public Forum on this public television station.